So in my kickoff video, I talked a little bit about my 87 Merkur that I'm building. Sounds like people might be interested in a little bit more detail on the car, so I thought, well, let's do a video. We'll dive in, talk about the mods and the upgrades I've done to this. Let's get into it. So as I mentioned in my kickoff video, this is my 1987 Merkur XR4Ti. For those of you that don't know, this is a German-built Ford. They were imported from 85 to 89. In Europe, these were known as the Ford Sierra, and since GM had the trademark on the name Sierra, Ford had to come up with a different name for the US market. The Merkur, if you don't know, is just German for Mercury. These were marketed and sold through the Lincoln Mercury dealers. Unfortunately, that was a bit of a failure. It's a shame because these are really decent cars. These dominated racing over in Europe, Australia. I believe they also raced in Japan. Another interesting thing about these cars, in 1987 you could get monocolor. You could get them in all white or all black. This car I found up in Seattle. It happened to be an automatic, but it's been converted to a manual. Really good solid car. Very minimal rust. Basically about the only rust that I've had to deal with was around the windshield. Looked like unskilled windshield shops maybe had gotten their hands on it over the years. So I had the old windshield pulled out. I prepped the frame, coated it with BoPort 15. That's what this black material is. And then had the windshield reinstalled. So hopefully I will never have to worry about rust in the windshield frame. But other than that, really solid car. No rust. It's got plenty of dings in it, but ultimately I'll get it painted here once I finish all the mechanicals. Alright, let's go ahead and jump in and we'll talk about the lights. So these cars, when they were brought into the US, they had installed plastic headlights and a plastic marker light. Well, over the years those turned yellow, so these have terrible nighttime visibility. So these happen to be the glass European lights. There's a couple of different ways you can install these. One is you can modify the US sheet metal, kind of pound it out of the way and form it to fit the European light. Or you can actually pick up the correct sheet metal surround brackets. That's what I did. I cut out the US spec sheet metal and I had the correct sheet metal welded in to fit the European lights. So now they're a direct bolt in. Mounting screw here, 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 and there's one down there. An interesting thing about these lights is they've got a long range driving light. That's what this part is here. This is the regular headlight with your low beam, high beam. I've got the long range driving lights wired into a separate switch in my center console. Let me go ahead and turn those on and I'll give you an idea what they look like. Here's the switch I have wired up for the long range driving lights. Yeah, you can see it shining on the wall there. Just those long range driving bulbs are 55 watt halogen. Okay, you can see now I've got low beams on with the fog lights, driving lights, whatever you want to call them. I got clear turn signals, marker lights. I've done an LED conversion on a lot of the lights in this car. I'll take a look at the back here. So just my running light, LED license plate lights. I don't have the marker on the other side right now. I've got it out, but there's the rear marker, and that's an LED. I've got that wired into my high dash there. So yeah, really nice improvement. Anybody that owns one of these cars, I suggest you look into doing the European light upgrade. One thing to keep in mind though, coming from Europe, there is a right-hand drive model of the headlight and a left-hand drive version of the headlight. You can look online. One of the websites I'll post, I believe it's Merkur Club of America, there's actually a post that they talk about the different pattern in the glass here, and it helps you determine if you have the right-hand drive or the left-hand drive version. It's not that there'd be a problem using the right-hand drive version, it's just some people claim you get brighted from opposing traffic more often than if you were happen to be driving with the left-hand drive version. Okay, as I mentioned in my kickoff video, these cars came with the 2.3 turbo engine. The automatics, if I remember right, were rated at a miserable 140 or 145 horsepower. and the 5-speed version manual cars were rated at 175 horsepower. These cars did not come with a factory intercooler like what was in the Thunderbird Turbo Coupe or the Mustang SVO. They're limited to, if I remember right, it's been a long time since I've driven a stock one of these, but if I remember right, they were limited to 15 psi boost. Okay, so let's talk about what we got going on in here. So again, like I said, I will put links to all the different vendors and websites. There's a lot of support out there for these cars. So we'll start here with the strut towers. So I've got these caster camber plates in here, and these were made by a gentleman by the name of David Godfrey. Wiring out of the way. I've actually got a lot of David's parts on the car. He's made some really nice upgrades for these cars. So basically this requires drilling a large hole in the top. With this setup you can never go back to a stock strut setup, but definitely worth it adding the caster and camber plates. There just aren't many options out there unless you want to do something completely custom. His kit also includes a mount here that allows you to run a strut tower brace, which I haven't gotten. I got my eyes out for one. If not, I'm going to have to custom make something. And then coolant overflow bottle. That's also a David Godfrey part. These cars have a ridiculous cooling system, to say the least. But what I've got going on here is this hose runs down to the water pump. This one runs back to the oil cooler, and then this is going to be water return from my turbo. Okay, normally on these cars the battery would mount back here in the right rear of the engine bay. It's a real bad spot. As you can see, it's right next to the turbo, so you get a lot of heat off the turbo, and batteries don't last long in these cars, so I've done a trunk mount battery in mine. This is going to be my boost controller, not is, but this is the boost controller. I've relocated some stuff, tried to clean up the engine bay as much as possible. There's a little vacuum canister back here for the AC, excuse me, the vent system in the car. And there's another firewall piece. There's two more actually, a center piece and then a piece over there. I just don't have them in right now. Okay, well, let's start taking a look at the engine. So this engine, it's been fully built. So the block I sent off to a local machine shop. I had it honed 20 over. It's got CP pistons in it. It's got Esslinger billet rods. Crank was all in spec, so I didn't have to have anything cut on the crank. So crank's all stock specs, stock bearings. It's been polished and balanced. I'm running a Esslinger windage plate. I'm running ARP main studs. It's been a while since I put this in here, so I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. So that basically covers the short block. Stock crank, stock crank, ARP main studs, Esslinger windage tray, Esslinger billet rods, and CP20 over pistons. I went with stock compression. That's what everybody recommends with these cars. They really don't recommend raising compression on these cars, so it's 8.5, or excuse me, 8 should still be 8-to-1. As for the head, one of the big performance companies out there is a company called BoPort. A gentleman by the name of Bo Chrisman runs that company. He's over in the Carson City area. So I've got his CNC stage 3 head, but it's been hand worked to a stage 4. It's got 1.89 inch intake and 1.62 inch exhaust valves. It flows just a hair under 235 intake and just shy of 200 CFM exhaust. I'm running Bose 2.5 cam. I decided to stick with the hydraulic roller setup. Got beehive springs. Next here we got the header. So I was running I was running a different header, but I decided to go with one of Bo's headers that flows more. So this is one of Bo's custom headers. I had it sent off and I had it ceramic coated. This is set up for external wastegate. I'm running a Garrett GTX Gen 2 3076R turbo. Okay, so off the turbo into the intercooler. This is a forged intercooler. In Europe, they had the Cosworth RS500 version of these cars. And this is the Forge RS500 intercooler. You can see it's just absolutely massive. I started building this many years ago and didn't really care about AC at the time, but unfortunately, I do these days, but there is absolutely no room to maintain AC. Like I said, this intercooler is just massive. Next part here, we've got an all-aluminum radiator. So these are unique. Another one of the vendors that supplies parts for the community came up with this radiator. It sits a little bit lower, so you can actually run the Forge intercooler and bring the pipes, inlet and outlet pipes, the intercooler up over the radiator. These cool really well. But if I have problems with this, he came out with a new, see right there, 3-inch thick version of the radiator. So if I have any cooling issues, I'll be switching over to the thicker radiator. That's my intercooler and radiator combo. Right now I just have a single electric fan. But I did buy, there's a Mishimoto dual fan setup that I believe is actually designed for the Mazda Miata, but it fits on these radiators really well. So I will be installing that at some point. All right, let's move over to the intake side of the engine here. So this is a stock lower intake for this car. However, this is BoPort's CNC ported stage 4 lower intake. And then this is his newly released upper intake. And the nice thing about this, it mounts to the base with a V-band clamp, so you can rotate this any way. Now, one of the things with these cars, the alternator would normally sit in this area, and it makes it tough to have a forward-facing intake, which of course makes plumbing into your intercooler easier. Stock, these cars have the intake, or the intake points this way, and it goes up over the valve cover. So this just makes intercooler plumbing a lot easier. He designed this to be able to fit multiple throttle bodies. I got a billet fuel rail that's supplied by a couple of vendors in the community. I'll list links to that below. Boy, it's been a while since I spec'd everything, but I think I got FIC 1000 injectors, I believe, is what I'll be running in it. So the reason that I had this all done and complete and all assembled, but the reason I've got it torn back down again is because I updated the header. I went to the stage 4 lower intake, and actually I just couldn't leave well enough alone. I had a stage 3 head, but when he came out with the CNC porting and then also increased the stage, made stage 4 available, I couldn't leave well enough alone. So pulled the head off, sent it over to Bo. Like I say, he hand worked this into a stage 4. Got his header bolted on there. His intake, upper and lower intake setup. And let's see, head gasket. I'm running a Felpro 1035 head gasket. Another little trick for anybody that runs these cars, if you don't know. The absolute best valve cover gasket you can get for these right here. This is reusable. And these came off a little bit later model of the Ford Ranger. You can still get them from Ford. But if you're running one of these and you have valve cover leaks, and if you're not running with these gaskets, I highly recommend you get this. This will take care of your leaking problems. So let's see. So these cars originally came with a water-cooled turbo. I decided to stick with the water cooling. So this is my water feed line. Like I said, over here is my return line. Next item, let's talk about the engine mounts. Get the camera down in here. So right there, I'm running a custom motor mount. These were designed and built years ago by a guy named, I believe he went by Chuck W. on the boards. Unfortunately, he's not making these any longer. It firms up the mount of the engine a lot better. Let me see if I can get over. Yeah, there we go. And you can see the one on the passenger side of the engine. So that's another upgrade I've got with the engine mounts. Let's move around this way. Okay, on the back of the block here, this aluminum plate here, this is an adapter plate that allows me to run a Mustang 302 bell housing. One of the issues with these cars is how small the clutch is. I didn't want to have to deal with slipping clutch, and I just wanted to eliminate that problem altogether. So I went ahead and got the adapter plate. I believe this is made by a company called Canfield Industries. Got me a Ford Mustang 302 bell housing. The T5, whether 4-cylinder or V8, it bolts up to the 4-cylinder or the V8 bell housing, so that's not an issue. So I'm running a Borg-Warner T5 transmission that's been freshly rebuilt. And then I've got a spec, I think it's the Stage 3 V8 clutch. I can't remember the torque rating, but it increases the torque holding capacity so much above the 4-cylinder stuff. And then next I had to go ahead and get a new starter, so I've got a 5.0 starter in there. Okay, let's see. Is there anything left on this side? No, let's... Oh, yeah, one more thing. Okay, so because of Bo's header design, I was planning to run... Get some of this stuff out of the way. Okay, so I was planning to run a Ford Ranger alternator bracket. So on the Ford Ranger, it puts it down, well, in the front of the passenger side of the engine, down a little bit lower. Unfortunately, with Bo's header design, the primary tube here on cylinder 1 was in the way. So I cut myself a plate so I could drop the alternator down. I had about an inch machined off the back of it so it would still keep it close to the engine. You see, I just got some plastic spacers in here just trying to get an idea of fit. I need to pull this out and finish the mount, but everything worked out pretty well. Okay, so over on the passenger side here, let's look at my vent system. So it's kind of hard to see because it's down underneath the lower intake. Actually, let's go over and take a look at this engine here, one I got on the stand. So on these 2.3s, that right there is an oil separator. Comes up out of the crankcase. Normally you'd have a hose there that would run up to your upper intake, and then your PCV valve mounts in that hose. There's a company called Yoshi Fab that makes a fitting, so you can actually pull this out and there's just a hole in the block, and Yoshi Fab makes a fitting that'll fit down in there, and then it gives you a JIC fitting to put a hose on. But I decided to go ahead and keep that separator. This basically meshes steel mesh in there, so it helps to separate out the liquid oil from the vapors. So let's back over on my car here. So you can't really see it, but I kept the separator and then I just put a fitting on it coming out to this hose. And then up in the upper left front corner of the engine bay, I've got my breather set up, my catch can, my breather. Then when the valve cover's on, there's another fitting at the back of the valve cover, so there'll be another hose, and it actually comes down here. So what I did, I actually found this idea on the internet. It was actually David Godfrey that I saw an engine he built years back. He did this. So this plate here, on the early versions of this engine when they were running carbs and they had a mechanical fuel pump, that's where the fuel pump would mount. So what I did is I just drilled and tapped into this plate. So the idea being here is the line coming off the valve cover will come down and it tees in here, and then this one runs up to the bottom of my catch can there. So the idea being, if any oil does gather in here when the car's off, it'll just be allowed to drain back into the crankcase. And then I still have a way for the crankcase and the head up in the valve area to be able to vent into my catch can. Let's see, oh yeah, so in addition to my billet fuel rail, I've got a block there for my fuel pressure regulator. And again, this is another piece that several of the companies that provide parts in this 2.3 community supply that. And then this is actually this fuel pressure regulator is common with the Ford 302, so those are easy to come by. I can't remember the name of that one off the top of my head. So basically I've got return, feedback there on my fuel rail, return here going through my regulator, and then this line takes you back down to the return line underneath the car back to the tank. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. So being that I'm running an MS3, I got wiring harness that I built. It's just not plugged in because I don't have the engine all together right now. Another interesting part, see right down there, that aluminum plate to be able to mount this master cylinder. So this master cylinder is off of a newer Ford Thunderbird. This is another part that David Godfrey came up with. And the idea behind this was he had he put together a couple brake kits years ago, different front disc brake and a rear disc brake for these cars. I believe, remember right, the front used Contour SVT rotors with, I'm trying to remember the name. It was an aluminum 2-piston caliper that came out of Mustang. PBR calipers. And then the rear was a Ford Thunderbird Turbo Coupe caliper with the Thunderbird Turbo Coupe rotors, if I remember right. So he came up with that adapter to be able to run this Thunderbird master cylinder because it had a better piston diameter, I believe. So that's that setup there, and then right down there, underneath the clutch cable, this piece right here, I got a line lock plumbed in. Let's see if I can. There's a pretty good shot of it. So that should be fun. Allow me to do big smoky burnouts. So let's see. I'm trying to think. I think I covered everything on the engine. One other piece, these cars, let's see if I can get. Okay, so right there, that 90-degree elbow, the oil filter mounts off of this part right here. And then this is a liquid cooled oil cooler. So I know a lot of people like to eliminate those, but I decided to go ahead and keep it on this, or on my setup. The Ford engineers felt that there was a good reason to have it, so I decided to keep mine in place. Now let's see if there's anything else I missed. I covered everything. Built bottom end, fully ported big valve head, fully ported intakes, high flow header, Garrett GTX Gen 2 3076R turbo, the caster camber plates, the aluminum overflow, or actually coolant fill tank, which is nice. The stock piece is plastic, and they yellow up and they break, so this is a nice replacement for that. Boost controller. Oh, one other piece. Running a forged blow-off valve right there. And I don't have it on here, but I'm running a tile external wastegate. So yeah, tile MVR. This one is liquid cooled, so I'm actually thinking about plumbing water to it since I've got water feed for my turbo right there. Yeah, it's a nice piece. Okay, so I went and grabbed my valve cover so you guys can get an idea of how I've got my coil set up. So these are LS coils, and what I did is I had some standoffs welded on my valve cover, and then I made this mount here out of some aluminum, some flat aluminum stock, and then some angle aluminum. And then basically just fasten my coils on there, and then I bought an MSD wire kit. just built custom plug wires. So not exactly coil on plug, I guess you could call it coil near plug. Get that water line out. I've got heat resistant covering on them. Then I always run the I believe what, fiberglass insulators. I think they call them the fiberglass insulators on the plug boots to protect those. So yeah, but there's my coil setup. I know I had a guy question me before about the coils and being up on the valve cover. I figure if GM can mount them on their valve covers and they survive that heat and those conditions, I think these should be okay sitting on top of the valve cover here. Alright, well, it's a good overview of the engine bay. I think I covered everything. If you got any questions, let me know. Really looking forward to getting this one buttoned up and getting it fired up. It's been a long ongoing build. I'm ready to see it run. So there you go, detailed video on the engine build. If you got any questions, please drop some comments, let me know. Hope you guys found that interesting. See, I'm really looking forward to getting this thing running. I got a lot of money wrapped up in this car. Should be a lot of fun when I get this thing on the street. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, share the video. Remember, keep it PG.